and then we'll be good to go. Okay, awesome. Can everyone hear me all right, Annie? We're still awesome. Okay. All right. Okay. Hey everyone, welcome. So get started here. Thanks for jumping in with us today on a Friday in May. I really appreciate everyone joining us here today because we have some really exciting stuff to talk about to help you plan for your courses for summer, fall, spring, whenever you have some next courses, new courses coming up. But wanted to just first start off with introducing myself here. So go over what we're going to do today, who are we, what's going on here today, why you're here, and then we'll have a special guest here who I'm going to talk to about a lot of the common questions we get when people are planning for new courses with Packback. And then we'll have some Q&A at the end. So if anything that you have a burning question that we didn't get to address, please just wait for that and we can go over any specific questions or a Q&A then. So but welcome everyone. So really quick, if you've never met me before, I'm Krista and I'm a Packback Experience Manager. I've been here for about 3.5 years now. I also have my master's degree in education and I taught for 10 years at the K-12 level. And I love using tech in my classes. And so that's how I came here to Packback to make that my job. And I want to introduce our very, very special guest and give her a chance to say hi and anything she'd like to say. But we have Dr. Siobhan Thorpe here, who's been using Packback since 2020. So she is someone who knows Packback very well, knows course planning very well, and a wonderful professor. So Siobhan, go ahead and say hi.
Yes, good morning. Well, it's good morning here in Virginia. Really great to be here again. My name is Siobhan Thorpe, professor, as you can see on the screen, in the Department of Biochemistry. I also hold an administrative position at the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences here at Virginia Tech in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. And I've had the pleasure of adopting Packback in all of my courses since 2020, both in person, virtual, asynchronous, synchronous, runs the gamut from small and large classrooms. So really happy to be here and just share my experiences with all of you.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to probe your brain, ask you some questions here, and see what we can, share that knowledge with other professors. That was one of my favorite ways of learning new things or new ideas when I was teaching is hearing from my colleagues. So today's intention is really going to be talking about some types of courses that sometimes professors have trouble figuring out how to use Packback in. And so one of those categories is those really, really quick types of classes. So mini mesters, whether it's like a January class, a summer term, some of them are 5, 10 weeks. Also accelerated courses. I know more and more schools these days are doing like half semester courses where you have to cram everything into 8 weeks, and that's really hard. So we just wanted to go over some things, some ideas, and how we've seen professors utilize Packback in these types of courses to help you out. So first, I just wanted to ask some questions to you, Siobhan, and feel free to jump in here and share your thoughts, because a lot of times professors aren't really sure, how could I use Packback in this class, or what would be the goals, or how could we benefit the students here? So yeah, just wanted to kind of pick your brain here. What do you think students might struggle with in accelerated courses, and then what might the professors struggle with in these accelerated courses too?
Yeah, I've taught accelerated courses over the summer, having to fit a full semester in like 6 to 8 weeks. And on the nose, students struggle with the pace. And so really wrapping their head around the expectations around kind of the delivery and how to keep on top of the material at such a quick pace. And then as a professor, it's really kind of almost space time with the students, even if it's in person or virtually, allowing access to the professor where students have questions, and they may have more questions because they're consuming such a large amount of information quickly. So being available to students to give feedback at a timely and efficient manner, because the course moves so quick, I found to be a challenge for myself as a professor.
Yeah, and as someone who's taken these courses, I think it's definitely not always the ideal situation, but sometimes it's what you have to do, for make sure you're graduating on time. And as an instructor, you're often assigned these classes and you want to do the best by the students, right? Like, how do we make sure it is the same experience or they learn the same as the students in the full term courses? So I just wanted to ask you, Siobhan, because I agree with all those challenges. I think it's something that's challenging for the student and the professor. And, Packback can help with feedback, can help with having that space for the students. But when you've taught in a full semester course and a accelerated course, are the learning objectives any different, or is there anything else you have to do differently that you can think of?
Yeah, I think the learning objectives for me at least remain the same because we want that equity in the experience of the student. However, the pedagogical approach may need to shift depending on a full semester, right, versus an accelerated one. And so maybe student group work, how the engagement, how they interact, the type of assignments, the frequency and delivery of assignments would change. And so those are the things that I really tweak as a professor, but the learning objectives, the root of it for me at least remains the same.
Yeah. That's really common what I hear from my professors. They're like, I have to squeeze the same amount in. I can't, do a disservice to these students, but I'm not sure how to do that. They're not sure how to always take the success they've seen with Packback or other assignments in their full semester course and make it work in the shorter time frame. So got some ideas we're going to talk about here in a second, but I really appreciate you sharing that. So yeah, just kind of then my follow-up question is, so we have to change some of the pedagogy, right? We have to, I think, from my perspective, is, we really need to be more aware of making sure that the students don't fall behind because in the accelerated courses, there's no time for that, right? If they miss one thing, one module, they can't really, it's really hard to catch up. You talked about also, making sure that the students have access and you're able to, access to you to ask questions, give a lot of feedback as well. Yeah, so just some ideas how maybe you could see, Packback helping you achieve the same learning outcomes or any thoughts there?
Yeah, so Packback has really been a game changer for my students in an accelerated course because of the full integration of this awesome and amazing kind of coach, this AI coach. They're getting feedback either if it's not from me, while I can provide feedback, they have this 24/7 access to really rich feedback from this integration of the AI, whether it's via deep dive, whether we're talking about the discussion aspect of the platform. And so they're getting really quality feedback at all times throughout the course. And then there's ways I think that I can design or leverage the platform, whether it's the discussion polling, having those concept checks at a more kind of frequent basis. So providing those lower stakes pathways for students to practice and almost fail early. I tell my students all the time, it's okay to make mistakes, make them early, make them often. And so they can do that on the platform in a really safe space that they're still getting credit and celebrated for their engagement. However, they're not penalized for, that learning process. And that's something my students have always cited that they really enjoy about the platform. And so I think that's heightened in an accelerated course where the content is being thrown at them really, really quickly. So those are some things that come up for me where Packback would be the perfect complement for these accelerated courses in my experience.
Yeah, yeah, I love that you brought up, failing early so we can fix it early, right? I think that's so important. And through our pedagogy at Packback, all of it is about as much formative learning and formative feedback that we can get, the sooner the better. So whether that's, like you said, through the AI feedback or from feedback from the professor, and also the chance to make a mistake and then go back and fix it. So I really love that you said that. That's amazing. We talked a little bit about this already. We talked about how engaging with students by giving them feedback using the Packback tools so they feel like they have access to you to ask questions. And then we also talked about the polls, which I'm going to show some polls and how you could utilize that for checking for understanding as well in a short class. But if you have any other tips for anyone on how you would make sure that they're staying actively engaged and not missing, a whole module if they fall behind or miss a piece of information. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think having those open, I love that Packback now has this assignment-based grading, and that there's flexibility to keep assignments open throughout the entire mini semester or semester. And so I think that's really, really great to keep them engaged. The platform has a really fun kind of gamification aspect of it. And so I think professors myself can leverage that to make it kind of a competition, make it fun. That's something that my students have enjoyed to keep them engaged, whether that's extra credit for being at the top of the leaderboard or something like that, to just make it kind of fun for them to kind of use the platform. And then obviously something that probably students may or may not appreciate, but from the professor's end, right, ensuring that there's a good amount of the assignments that are actually in the platform. So how often are they in the platform doing those assignments, the writing, the discussion? And so I try to design my courses to ensure that a good percentage of my class is them actually using the tool. And so that helps with engagement because a lot of their grade is connected to that tool. And so they get the benefits, whether they appreciate it or not. They're reaping the benefits of being in the platform, again, engaging with the integrated AI, engaging with myself as a professor. So I'm in there, I pen, I highlight, I spark, right? And so they see me being active in the platform as a model, and that encourages them to be active as well. It's not something where it's this one-off tool that the professor kind of assigns them to use, and they don't see myself in it.
Yeah, I love what you said about intentionally planning because, how do we take those, maybe 12 pack back assignments that you have and then fit it into a 5 week mini master like that. And I think too, yeah, and you might think too, your own role would change a little bit, right? So if normally you go on pack back once a week to pin a post or give some feedback or use your features, that might be something in like it's a 3 week class. You might want to do that, daily and then bring a question into the next class. I also think too, it helps keep them engaged with their peers, which is a really big piece of student learning. So that kind of brings me into my next question because I know a lot of these accelerated courses are in a different modality than they usually are in the regular semester. I know a lot of my professors who teach in person during the semester. Then in the summer, they're teaching online just because of how quick the class goes. So yeah, just if you have any thoughts, I know you've taught in a lot of different varieties, whether it was because of the pandemic and you had to, or because of the course schedule. If we're thinking about like a shorter class, maybe someone who's never used Packback in a in-person or an online environment. If you have any thoughts there, any tips, Siobhan, yeah, I'd love to
Yeah,
hear.
the thing that comes up for me front and forward is community. And so that's something that I went into Packback excited to see myself building community in my courses, to have that peer-to-peer connection, which was organically happening somewhat in person, but then you have these cliques and the students that all talk to each other and they have this kind of group. And so what I saw is that all students in the course were not able to access and leverage each other. And so this platform gives this kind of equity-based access for all students to have this open dialogue and discussion and learn from each other, again, providing themselves that platform to really articulate what they know, their passions, their interests, and that everyone benefits. And so that's really, really exciting, whether it's in person, but particularly when you're online and hybrid, because students don't have the pleasure of just interacting with each other in person. And so it's really cool to see them have this enriching dialogue on Packback, especially in those types of course modalities.
Yeah, I agree. And something that we really talk about a lot in K-12 is, relationship building. And that's really what, when you're talking about community, is making those relationships. And that can be, something that happens in an in-person class organically, and then sometimes it needs a little more help as well. But in an online class or a hybrid class, that can be almost impossible. And so think about, a student who feels like they have community coming from their peers, coming from their professor, they feel like they have their space, they are a valued member of that group, they're much more likely to be successful. And the more successful they are, the more they've learned, the less likely they are to drop the class or just not learn as much as they could. So I think the community aspect is really important in all types, but I agree, especially in the online or different modalities as well, because we really want to make sure the students who normally wouldn't participate and or normally would get kind of lost in the shuffle of a really fast class, they have that space there. So, oh my gosh. Okay, thank you. That was all really amazing ideas. And what I'm going to do next is just kind of show some communities and some ideas on how we make this happen, right? So we just talked a lot about the benefits, why you would want to use it, what goals you would be achieving. But let's kind of talk now a little bit more practically, right? So when it's an accelerated course, how do we take that, what we've done successfully in the fall full semester, and now make it work in a very short J-term class? So here are some ideas that I've gotten from other professors and setting up these classes over the years. And I'll pull up some examples as well. But Siobhan, if any time you want to jump in, please just feel free because I know you have such amazing insights and thoughts, and you also have a wonderfully planned course, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. So my first thought is that, obviously when you have the full 15-week semester minus, Thanksgiving or finals week, you probably end up with around 8 to 12 pack assignments. And so some professors, they see that and they're like, I cannot replicate that in a 2-week class. Obviously, that's where the intentional planning is going to come in, right? We want the students to use Packback and see the value. So we want to change the usage so it makes sense. But we also want to make sure that they're not doing a drastically different amount of work than the students in the full semester because we don't want them to miss out on that learning. So my suggestions are twofold here. I've seen professors do it either way. So you could either one, keep the weekly format. So say you have a 5-week class, instead of having 10 packbacks, you could have 5. But what you could do then is change the posting amount. So I've seen professors that, generally we recommend they do 1 question and 2 responses every week. If it's going to a 5-week semester, we would just change each assignment to 2 questions and 4 responses or something along those lines. And I know that those semesters can go so fast, they have so much material to pull from that they might even have a harder time thinking of questions just because there's so much more that they've learned that week. So that's where it really helps them with synthesizing what they're learning so they don't get behind or things don't fly over their head and they miss it. The other thing I've seen professors do is if you want to keep the topics more siloed, I know Siobhan mentioned our changes in assignment-based grading. This is another thing I've seen professors really utilize in the shorter classes. So what you can do now is you can have multiple assignments open at the same time. So the screenshot, if you can see it there on my screen, this is a professor who used Packback last summer. And what she did was she had 2 assignments open every week. So she kept the requirements the same, but she wanted to keep the topics separate. So you notice in the screenshot that Packback 1, Packback 2 are open at the same time. So this way, the students have a place to go to talk about either topic. So that way nothing gets overlooked or missed, and it's still all nicely organized. So kind of really up to you which way you'd want to go there, but those are the 2 main ways people generally look at it. Another idea is your deep dive assignments. So if maybe you think the discussion would be a little too fast paced for the students, we could also talk about doing deep dive assignments to reply and reflect on your learning. So I've seen professors do this in like 5-week courses where they have a deep dive every week. So the reflection piece of learning is something that I know Siobhan really emphasizes in her classes. So feel free to jump in, but I know it's something that is often left out of the learning process. And it's something that students really won't often do on their own unless pushed or it's suggested. It's not something they generally incorporate into their study habits, but it can have such an impact on the long-term learning outcomes of the students. So just having them do like a weekly reflect on what we've learned this week, and how you've grown. And then also, if you're using it through the discussion, it could also be then to help give each other reflections on how they've grown as well. Siobhan, I know you do that in your class. So if you'd like to talk a little bit about it, feel free. If not, I can talk a little bit about some of the other things we mentioned.
I would really reiterate that I think regular types of reflection is definitely a best practice pedagogically. And I love the deep dive assignments where they can talk about their growth, but then also articulate areas of which they're still kind of, a little bit gray, a little bit confused. So there's ways to use the tool to get them to be introspective and engage in that metacognitive practice, which you're right, they have to be taught to do that. But it's a safe way for them to say, hey, I've learned these things and I'm still a little bit confused here. And I do that with the polling too. So there's so many ways to leverage the platform to really capture that in a safe way, and then recircle back around as a professor and reinforce those lines that could be a little bit shaky for those students. So I agree.
Yeah, I really like how you said the metacognition, right? Because I hear from a lot of professors is that sometimes students aren't taking ownership of their own learning, and that's because they're really missing that piece, that reflection piece, where they can take a look and think, okay, what did I do good? What did I do well? What can I improve on? What did I learn? Because that makes them feel like, okay, I have ownership in my success in this class, and that will lead to them being much more motivated. So it is a piece that we kind of have to sometimes you know, uh, encourage the students to go to. So that is a great avenue for some assignments on Packback. And you mentioned the polls, and I just wanted to put up both of these thoughts here. So using the feedback tools in the discussion is really great to make sure students are staying on track and there's no huge misconceptions in the class in this fast-paced environment. But also the polls are a great way, because that way you can use that either as a check-in on the students to check in on how they're doing. Oops, sorry. And then also as a way to check for comprehension. So you can kind of go both ways with the polls, using them as a process of learning piece or as a check for understanding piece. But I'll show you some examples here in a second. So on the screen I pulled up the professor that utilized in a summer course and had the two assignments open at the same time. Just wanted to pull up some other ideas that I've seen. I also have suggested to professors before, if it's an accelerated class, that you don't always have to have the same assignment all the time as well. So these classes, like Siobhan said, we need to be a little more intentional with the assignments as we map them out because we are really short on time. So this is a professor I worked also with last summer, an accelerated course. And the thing I really liked that he did, you'll notice that the assignments are a little bit different because he doesn't have them doing questions every week. So with the assignment-based grading, he had them doing 2 questions and 2 responses when he had them doing his discussion, their discussion, sorry, a space for them to ask questions and process the material. But then he also had the students where he would ask his own questions certain weeks. And this could be either an open-ended question or it could be a polling question. And so this is a really nice way to do a little bit of both. So, you don't have to think, well, every assignment has to be the same cadence every time. So I'll just pull his community in here so we can take a look at that a little more closely. Let me just turn on FERPA compliancy. Okay. So just wanted to point out here, you can see how he has some assignments where they are just responding to him and some assignments where they are the ones leading the discussion. So both have a space pedagogically in the class. They're achieving different goals, but they're both things that you can do on Packback. And so utilizing the polls is a really great way to check for the students' understanding and also check and reflect and see how they're doing. And the nice thing about the homework polls, the questions with options, if you haven't tried them out yet, is that the students have to say why they chose what they did. So that's really making sure they come full circle with the learning process. So I want to show you all that community. And then here are just some examples of some other types of polls. Once again, these are the polls where the students have to justify. On the left, you can see one that is more based on reflection of learning. So something that Siobhan and I were talking about is we need to kind of nudge them in that direction. So you could do this via deep dives, as I mentioned, or also via a poll. So in this professor, he wanted to, on the left, make sure that the students were connecting what they're learning in class with some current trends. It was a marketing class. So you can see the responses he just gave them to choose from is, I can make a connection, I can compare, or I can contrast. So it's giving the students choice, but also having them do some reflection. And then the poll on the right is checking for understanding. So this is an asynchronous, shorter summer term class where the students are watching some movies by themselves. It's a cinema class. And so the professor wanted to make sure that even though they're watching their movies on their own, that there's something that they are making sure that they grasp from every single film, the most important concept. So here he uses his polls to check for understanding for the students. So 2 great ways to use polls. And one last thing that I mentioned was deep dives. And I mentioned using it as a reflection piece. So, for example, having the students write what they learned that week, what progress they made, what they could do better, what they're looking forward to for the future. But also, I have a professor who I work with that uses it for what she calls handout assignments. And I think these could be used in a lot of different courses, but I think in an accelerated course, they would really benefit because essentially what she has them do is she has them essentially write their own summary notes of the material for that week. So all of the readings, all of the sources that they've been looking at, she has them write what she calls handouts, but you could call them a lot of different things. And she wants them to sit with the content, think about it, and synthesize it, which, like I said, is really important in these fast classes because we want to make sure that they are making those connections and not getting lost. And so you doing a weekly or bi-weekly deep dive like this would be great in an accelerated class, and also doing them in a full term class I think is a really cool idea as well. So yeah. All right, Siobhan, anything else that you want to add? I think we're going to move on to the next topic then, which was technical courses, which I know is definitely something you know a lot about. But yeah, before we move on, any
Nothing
other
more to
thoughts?
add at this time. Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks.
Okay. So yeah, the next thing I wanted to talk about was technical courses because I hear a lot of professors who, teach a lot of math-based courses or process-based courses or, capstone courses, and they're not really sure how to utilize Packback in that. They maybe are using it in their introductory courses, and that feels like a really good space and feels like they've got it down pat. But when it comes to their other courses, they're not really sure how to do that. And so Siobhan, as a teacher in STEM, is very familiar with this. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these questions. And then same thing, we'll look at some ideas. So start off with the basics. I know you touched on this a little bit because, community and making sure that students have a sense of space. But is there anything particular to, your topic area of science that you think PACRAC can really lend itself to helping students?
Yeah, I can only speak from my lens and my perspective. So that's my asterisk. And people can take from it what they will, right? But for me, it was really important to have my students develop and walk away with a sense of their scientific identity. And I don't think we really develop or curate that space in STEM to have students kind of flex that arm as they're going through higher education. And so Packback has been a phenomenal tool to really have my students do that deep dive and develop and articulate and build those bridges and connections so that we're not learning in this very siloed isolated type of bubble. So technical courses can get so deep and nuanced so quickly that we often lose sight of the full view, right? And so Packback has created that space for my students to really build those connections and bridges to say, this is how this course connects to society, to humanities, to you as a consumer, all of these things. And I'm biased. I think biochemistry connects to everything. You can argue that later if you want to. But it really helps give a platform to make those things. And so it does increase motivation and engagement because they're seeing where there's integration into the course material. And it helps students to answer the question, why am I taking this course? Why is this course important? When oftentimes in technical courses, we can lose that kind of vantage point, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Because students, they really do want to know the why behind what they're learning. That helps with their motivation and being able to piece it together as the bigger picture. I think we could relate everything to biochemistry. I mean, I even think about some of the things that were related to, just like even chemistry for the consumer type of topics that I still remember to this day learning because it related to something that was, I was doing in that moment. So I think I completely agree. Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about the types of assignments that you do on Packback for your course? And I can pull up your community as well.
Yeah, so I definitely utilize all three aspects of the platform. And so I am kind of that stereotypical, I guess, user where my students do have a weekly post and a discussion, pack questions, post one question a week and then reply to two of their peers. I do have sometimes discussion polls when those came out. I think they were called homework polls. And so I know that
Yeah.
there's different iterations now. But there's some type of polling, and either that's myself in semesters where I do have TAs. I'd like to elevate that I have TAs really active in the platform, and they may be writing content specific questions to kind of do those concept checks with polling in the course. And I don't have like that on a specific schedule, and that's more intermittent. It may come closer to our formalized exams or quizzes, things like that. But they do have access to those types of things. And then when Deep Dives, that product kind of rolled out, I did try to leverage that in my technical courses to do more critical analyses of primary research literature, at least in my case. And so to really have those students practice their writing and more technical writing. And the platform has really risen to the occasion for that as well. And so I've tried to think about ways to successfully leverage the full totality of the platform, even in my technical course.
Yeah. So you could do a little bit of everything, or you could pick your favorite and start there and then build for, next semester. But, the discussion has a place in a technical course, deep dives has a place, and, polls are always helpful to get more student feedback as well. Yeah, so I also have just a follow-up question there, and I know you did talk about motivation and being able to see the big picture in community, but if you have any other thoughts on what aspects that students struggle with the most beyond what we've already talked about. If there's anything, there, because that would kind of be an area that if I'm planning for a course like this, that I might think, okay, well, then how can we support them using one of these packback tools? Yeah.
Yeah, I think and again, from my perspective, and lived experience, I think students struggle with in technical courses like STEM is making those connections. And so I think historically they are taught in very didactic, right types of settings. And so they don't come into these courses expecting themselves to be able to build those connections and bridges. And so modeling that is really important, and getting them to explore and getting them to utilize their voices and talk about their passions and interests and make those connections. They can struggle with maybe a little bit. But once the semester gets going, you can see them really soar and start flying off. You're like, oh, okay, I get it. Sometimes obviously struggling with the type of content, it can be very nuanced, it can be very math heavy, it can be very visual heavy and understanding and memorizing processes and steps. But the platform kind of assists with that because you're still able to embed images and videos. And so you're not really limited in incorporating, chemical images or pathways or very specific technical things on the platform that students may need to know in those aspects. And so sometimes students struggle with that, but you're not limited. And I haven't been limited by the platform and really making sure and testing that my students know those more nuanced things.
Yeah, I agree. I think, in these types of courses, it can kind of become the thing where students aren't used to asking the question. They're just answering the question and they kind of get
Right.
focused on there's a right answer and I got to find the right answer. There's one way to do it, right? And they're really then missing
That's
the big
right.
picture. And that's where I just love that, our pedagogy is really focused on writing because that's such a powerful learning tool that sometimes gets ignored in some of these classes. I know obviously you see the value, but sometimes that's what something, I try to have that conversation with professors who aren't sure. It's like writing, we need to be doing it in all things. It can help so much. So thank you, yeah, for sharing that. Um, we did talk about this a little bit already, so sorry if it's getting a little bit too repetitive, but I just um, really, I guess when course planning, one of the things I feel like people should always start with professors should be pulling back and looking at the big picture, right? So that can kind of sometimes be a little bit difficult in the technical courses where you're like, I just, we have to get this specific thing covered. So yeah, especially when you're thinking about your courses, Siobhan, how do you kind of think about, okay, when this student graduates and 10 years from now, what are the really big things that I want to help them with now so that they see that success in this class when they graduate and then the future.
Yeah, we've touched on some of these. Again, teaching in a technical course, it's a balance. But for me, I want my students to walk away with an enhanced level of learning if they didn't come in with one. And I think that's just big as a lifelong learner. And so they're going to take more courses after mine. And even if it's not a formal course, you're going to be being taught something on the job in your career. So do you have a love of learning? Do you know yourself as a learner? Do you know your learning styles, how you typically like to learn, things like that? And so me personally, I do a whole metacognition lecture in my courses, and they're like, what are you talking about? It's biochemistry, it's fine. And then they see it, in real time, and it applies. So student success looks like to me is just increased self-awareness,
Yeah.
increased confidence of themselves that it's okay. They understand the process of learning, and so they can take that with them no matter what course they enter to about the rest of their journey in education and beyond. Of course, we assess whether they learn technical things, but again, the platform now creates a space for my students to realize that learning is the journey, learning is the process, right? And that it's okay to make mistakes, but that's a part of the process. And that I love that we celebrate and lift up that aspect of the process and make it safe for them, psychologically safe to do those things. And so I've seen this increase in confidence as they're going into those more formal assessments, the large exams, the quizzes that do weigh on their final grade. But we have this correlation between, oh, I can do this, right? And we reinforce those notions. So hopefully that answers the question, but that's what really excites me.
No, that answers the question perfectly because I think we just kind of talked about like how do we make it personal? How do we make them invested? And that's exactly what you were saying is that the students need to have that motivation for lifelong learning and make them curious. And that's what's going to get them through and keep them going when the technical course gets really tricky. And
Really
so
exciting.
we need to have that piece and it's a really difficult thing to do, but that's why we want to be here to support you and the students, to keep that safe space with Packback. So I love that. Yeah. And then I guess just one more question here. Yeah, I guess, I know you use Packback for a lot of reflection. You also use it, like you said, for longer technical writing. Um, any other tips do you have to get them engaged with the course material? Because I think we get a lot of students who sometimes think like, okay, I just went to lecture and that's it. Or I, I studied by looking at the book page. So if you have any other tips, especially for these science-based courses, to get students to go beyond that. I know you talked about your metacognition, but if there's anything else that you wanted to add, I just wanted to throw out that to wrap up this piece.
Yeah, well, one, I love that the platform allows students just to engage with each other. And so I come into that space, not that I'm the end all be all authority on the topic or subject. I see myself more as a facilitator. Yes, I have probably more years than you do, but students always bring such exciting and new things to the course. I'm like, I never would have thought of that. And this is so awesome. And so we kind of lift those things up. And so they see each other, and that increases engagement with this peer-to-peer type of connection. For myself, I try to bring in, again, that lived experience, bring in those tangible connections with the course material to something else. And that could be their interest in the career, it could be medical things. A lot of my students aspire to go to med school. So how do we connect what we're learning to the human body or something like that? And so that helps to increase engagement. And I can design assignments where they're encouraged or asked to think about that connectivity of the course material to other things outside the course. So those are some things that come up for me that have increased student interaction and engagement with the course material and definitely with each other.
I love that. That it's really inspiring. Thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah. I know these classes can be really hard to teach and really hard to take sometimes as a student. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for sharing. But so I'm just gonna come on give some ideas and Siobhan, same thing if you want to jump in, some kind of concrete. So we talked a little bit more about the benefits and how it can help the students, but then how do we take that that want to insert these a pack back into these courses to get those benefits, how do we make that concrete? So first off, which I know is how a lot of people use Packback already, but concept exploration or application of core concepts. Sometimes when I'm looking at some syllabi or talking to professors as they're talking about their courses that they're planning, I notice that sometimes in these technical courses, there can be a lack of the application or exploration, which if you skip that step and a student gets really bogged down in, like you said, memorization and processes, that can be where the student really gets lost. So, utilizing the pack-back discussion for the peer-to-peer learning, so they're supporting each other, and also, applying what you learned, and now go out and find and research examples of that. That's how you're going to really help the students get into the bigger picture part of the technical course, and as well making sure that they really understand it and not just understand, why, not just pick A, but understand why the answer is A as well. But speaking of the answer being A, we also have professors that use Packback for exam preparation in technical courses. I work with a instructor who utilizes it for her pharmacology students. So they're about to take one of their certification tests where they have to know how different medicines interact with each other. And that's obviously really high pressure to take that test. And so she uses it for the students to come up with their own questions as if they were writing a certification exam. And then they can help each other and practice questions as well. So it's just basically like an active form of studying. So I'll show you that community in a second. It's really cool. We talked a lot about reflection as well, but it can be something that's really vital in the technical courses. So don't skip on that piece. And there's a variety of ways we talked about doing it through deep dive assignments or for using the discussion as well. Also in these technical courses, I also find a lot of professors are doing labs. And, before we had deep dives, lab classes or lab sections wasn't always the type of course that professors thought about using Packback in. But if you have a lab section and you have them doing lab write-ups or have them doing, maybe like Excel workbooks, and then they have to say why they did what they did. Deep dives is wonderful for those. So I'll show you some examples of that in a second. Another thing professors use in technical courses for is deep dives with case studies. So this is really getting into the analysis, right? So presenting the students with a scenario, whether it's like something from Harvard Business Review or other sites, and they have to then explain or dive into it and apply what they're learning or explain how to solve a problem. So that's another piece where professors use Packback really successfully in technical courses. And then finally, current events. A lot of technical courses are also courses where, the science is flying by at a second and there is so many new things being discovered and found and written about in the news. And so that's another thing you can utilize, that is taking the students and giving them that space to connect what they're learning in class and then show where that is applicable in the real world. So that's another situation in which you could utilize Packback really successfully for a technical course. So one of the courses I just wanted to show briefly here on the right-hand side, it's a basic calculus class, and Carrie works with this professor. And the thing that I really like that they do here is, technically Packback is not the first thing you think of when you think of calculus, because you just think of, oh, lots of numbers, graphs, right? And you're not thinking of writing. But this instructor really wanted to make sure that they had that place for the student, because as someone who was, always really intimidated by math courses, that is a scary thing to be on your own. And so this instructor has them doing what they call the muddiest points. And this is something I've seen a couple people successfully do in their classes with Packback, but it's really impressive here in this calculus class. So I'll pull up the community here in a second, but you can see they set it up so there's different places where the students can ask their muddiest points for different weeks. And when you go into it, you'll see the students are really supporting each other and, answering each other's questions and really making sure that no one gets lost. And, they have that peer-to-peer to support the instructor feedback. And so this I thought was a really cool way that you could really put it into almost any technical course. So here's just an example for calculus. So yeah, here's the instructor's instructions for that week. We call it a guidepost here on Packback. So if you've not tried that, putting a guidepost into your discussion is a really great way to guide the student. So here you can see the instructor's information on how they should go about doing their muddiest point each week. The other instructor I talked about was the pharmacology class. So this class is really interesting because the students, she breaks it up into different blocks that the students are going to be tested on for their certification exam. And then the students are pretending that they are writing the certification exam. So they're writing these questions as if they were questions that the students would then see on their test. And so then their peers come in and answer the questions. And they have to say why they're choosing what they did. So kind of flipping the script here, I really love this because, the students, instead of just being like, okay, I got to answer the questions, thinking of the question, it really means that you fully understand the topic because it's, if you're flipping the script there and you're the one writing it and then helping your peers learn it, you've learned it yourself. So that's a really cool use of Packback for a very technical course on interactions of drugs for pharmacology. And here are some examples of professors using it in lab reports. On the left there, this was a course for advanced methods of social research. So they were essentially working through Excel assignments, and then they had to use the deep dive to put in a screenshot of the Excel workbook that they created. And then also saying, analyzing it, breaking it down. So that's where the writing came in the deep dive, is the instructor really wanted them to say, okay, now that we did all this math and we made this spreadsheet, what does it mean, right? So a lot of, research methods classes utilize this format. So deep dives is a really cool way to do that, as well as other lab reports for traditional other types of labs. So yeah, and case studies, like I said, case studies are wonderful for deep dives. If you've never utilized a case study, it's really all about analysis and students problem solving. So be another great way and avenue to get it for your technical courses. All right, so last topic, and then we'll do some wrap up, but just wanted to take a time to talk about small courses. I get a lot of instructors that, will have a smaller section than normal, whether it's because it's a grad class or it's, the 8 a.m. section. And normally they teach this class and it's like 30 to 40, but in this semester, in this class section, it's only going to be 10 or 5. So I hear a lot of professors that they're like, yeah, I usually use Packback, but enrollment is just really low. So just wanted to pick your brain, Siobhan, because I know you've used before. I think it was maybe during the pandemic years in a class that was like 10 students. Your thoughts on, why you use Packback in that class and how it could help students?
Yeah, I was gonna say, man, like it was a long time ago. Everyone knows
Yeah.
pandemic years are kind of a wash. But have I done it? Yes. And I think for the reasons that we've already cited, the students are going to benefit. And actually in smaller classes, you're going to get a lot more intimacy, for lack of a better word. So they're going to be able to potentially forge those relationships at a depth that may be more enriching than a larger classroom. But all the other reasons that we've already cited, those students are going to benefit from using the platform. And so I don't see it as a disadvantage at all for any professor to utilize the platform in a smaller enrolled course.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes when I'm talking to professors, I'm just, they see the smaller course and they think, okay, I'm just gonna, do things differently. But all the benefits that we've already talked about, they still need that in the small course. And certainly it makes certain procedural things easier because it's a smaller group, easier to communicate. But they still need to see all those advantages and have that space for themselves and also have a space to process all that material. And if we take Packback out of a course like that, you're losing all of those benefits, all of those gains that you had. So sometimes when I see professors have a smaller class, I'm like, oh no, but still use
Yeah,
Packback because it's you're missing out on all those pieces. So I just that's sometimes a knee jerk reaction that I feel like we should definitely avoid. But yeah.
right.
And we talked a lot about peer-to-peer learning, but if you've got anything else that you'd like to jump in and say, as I think in the smaller classes, the communication is easier, but it's also making sure that they're covering everything and really being there to support each other in their learning as well. But yeah, any thoughts, Siobhan?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of it. One thing that I love that you said earlier, Krista, is that some of these professors, with their intentionality and design, are creating space for students to assume that role of a teacher. And so with the peer-to-peer learning, if we do that, and reinforcing, do you really know this content? Do you really know what you're talking about? And that every student on the platform can now learn from each other. And so again, I say this all the time on the calls that I have the pleasure of being in, is this equity minded kind of design of the platform, that it's not just, I'm talking to the peer that sits next to me or my best friend in the class, and I have these great ideas, but you're really sharing it with everyone, and everyone has access and able to kind of glean and learn from each other. So I love the platform for that aspect specifically.
Agreed. Yeah. And another thing I would ask if you are teaching a really small course and you're unsure, there's also, like we talked about, a variety of other assignments that maybe you have in the small course that you just haven't tried on Packback before. So if you do have a small course, this could also be a really good avenue to try it in that way. So for example, if you have you want to do writing, but your other courses are too big, this is a great way to try that in your small class. Try out deep dives with essays. Is there a different type of assignment that you really want to do, but you can't have time for that when you're answering, emails from 100 students during your, in your larger classes? That totally makes sense, but this is the time that maybe you want to try the flipped classroom. Maybe you want to, start moving some of your writing assignments on there. So that's something I would say too for small courses. It's a really great opportunity for you to try maybe something different that maybe would be more procedurally different or difficult in the larger class is another just piece of feedback I would give to professors looking for their small courses. And I know we're running out of time here, so I just want to share a couple more things. But also remember is that, especially through deep dives, the individualized instant feedback that Packback gives the students. We've recently revamped it, so I'm not even sure, Siobhan, if you got to see the brand new, like it's literally just came out yesterday, but we've just added in even more pieces of feedback that were in the deep dives product now into the discussion product. So, even if you're thinking, okay, the class is small, I'm able to communicate with them all easily. You're not there when they're writing their papers at 2 a.m., right? You are the chemistry teacher, not the writing teacher, but we can really help you with that and, helping to support the entire student growth. Like we said, we want to you know, instill in that the students the love of learning and just kind of motivation and sense of self-worth and self-ability. And being able to get that instant feedback is when it's the most beneficial to the student. But even in small classes, that's something that we can't do, but the Packback AI can help you with. So definitely consider that as well when you're thinking about your small class. I just have a couple small class ideas here, and then we'll wrap everything up. But how do people use Packback in small classes? I think obviously we talked about the Packback questions discussion and how that can really benefit the students. But like I said, this can be really cool in a flipped classroom modality. If you've never heard of flipped classroom, it's essentially where the students are coming to class, and instead of you lecturing, they've already maybe watched the lecture or read, and then the class time is used for actual active classwork. So in that case, you could have the discussion and have the students, listen to the lecture ahead of time, write their questions on Packback, and then the class can be used for active work or active discussion. That works really well for small classes. Another tip would be to bring student posted questions into the live class, which you can do no matter what the class size is. But I feel like in a small class, you get that camaraderie within the students that can really benefit. We talked about getting AI feedback on the deep dive writing assignments. That could be so beneficial, even if the class is small. I also have a bunch of professors that use deep dives for the take home essay portion of a test. So you want to do writing assignments, writing assessments for, like example, on your tests, but you want to have a writing portion. Deep dives is a great way to do that. They can utilize that as their writing portion of the test. So something to consider when you're planning your small classes. And one last idea that I got from a professor that was really cool was in the small class, they decided to have weekly discussion leaders. So they really gave the students ownership of that discussion piece on Packback. And they said, okay, you are the leader for that week. You decide the topic. you post questions and then you facilitate the packback discussion. So this is really nice to do in a small class because that way, the students could each, for example, take a different topic or a different week to go through. So that idea is really cool. I will briefly show you guys that community here. It was a photography and contemporary issues class. And essentially each week that the students were doing their presentations, that student was then appointed the discussion leader. So they would post their discussion questions ahead of time for their class, and then they were in charge of, then responding to their peers' responses as well. So that's something that is definitely a lot more easy to orchestrate in a smaller class if you can. All right. Well, that's kind of wrapping up everything here today. I just wanted to, just remind everyone if you have any specific questions about your course, please contact your experience manager. We absolutely love course planning and talking about this stuff. You can see I just talked about it for an hour. So please, please, please bring this up and meet with us and, bring your syllabus and we can look at it and chat about the benefits and different assignments you could use it for. Or if you're not sure who your experience manager is, help@packback.co is our catch-all email, and we will point you in the right direction that way. But I also wanted to take a moment to say thank you, thank you, thank you so much to Siobhan. Everything you said was really inspiring and helpful. And like I said in the beginning, hearing from a colleague is usually how most of the professors can get good ideas and really, step up their learning game. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here.
Awesome.